we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, Season 2, Episode number 20. Today I am thrilled to be joined by James Stefano, a wedding photographer and event photographer based in Perth, Australia. James and I first connected on Instagram, where he shares a lot of educational content, and I always love people that share a lot of educational content online. So James and I connected over that, and then I got him on the podcast to chat all about his journey. You'll hear today how he started out doing sort of birthday shoots, doing gigs, photography gigs that he could get his hands on anything that he could possibly do. He did a $50 photography gig, he said, when he first started, to now going and shooting sort of luxury high-end weddings in the event space as well, shooting for big corporate clients. James's journey has been incredible. He's been in the space for over 10 years and really built himself up and built a real name for himself in Perth, Western Australia, where he's based. And you'll hear that journey going into today, and also some of his future planning of what he's wanting to do with his creative business and expand it more and bring on staff and hire other people to come onto his team to work under his brand to really elevate and extend what he's able to do. James also has a background in psychology and social work, and we talk about that today, how he's been able to bring that through and really translate the human experience. He talks a lot about working with people and being a people photographer, and the importance of understanding human connection and relationships with other people is super important in what he's been able to do and been able to build over the course of his career. And then also getting into that higher end market, how he was able to do that. A lot of people, are scared to jump into that space, and James has definitely built himself up to get into that market over the years. And he talks about a few of the things that got him to that stage, to being able to charge a premium price, but also work with those types of clients as well in a corporate space, but also in wedding photography, working with just everyday people who are just like him, and he's been able to bring them across from maybe in that corporate space. Maybe he's worked with them before they're into the wedding space. Overall, this is a pretty well-rounded conversation. We touch on a lot of different topics, from James's inspiration when he was first starting to AI and its impacts in the industry at the moment, photography, videography, pricing, charging for your work, all that type of stuff. So this is a well-rounded conversation talking about a whole bunch of different things, and I thought this was a good way to kick off 2025, first episode coming back. So let's jump over to James, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey Mike. Well, hello, James. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's really nice to, get another Aussie on the podcast. I actually interviewed two Englishmen last week, so it's nice to hear the Aussie accent back again.
Yeah. Good day.
I'm in Sydney, and you're in Perth, right?
West Australia. Completely different vibe over here, mate. Have you ever been?
I've never been to Perth. No, it's like the only place in Australia I've never been. Really?
Yeah.
Or Western
other side
Australia.
of the world, mate. Really, it's like 6 hours to get here from Sydney. 4 hours, 4.5.
By plane, yeah. It's such a long way. Like, to kind of put it in perspective, it's like LA to like New York, really. Like, it's kind of opposite ends of, but it's still in the same country. And I feel like there's so much variation between the two spots. Like, people think Australia is just one place, but there's so many differences between where you are and where I am. And I'm sure that, the way that I do business is very different to how you do it based on who your audience is in your market.
Yeah, we have a completely different style in West Oz. There was a lot of photographers in weddings specifically who came up with this kind of like, don't really know how you would describe it. It's like a really almost grungy kind of cinematic look from like the Land Down Under, that the cinematic but dark tones, and that done really well over here as a kind of trope. But I don't really see it come out of Sydney a lot though. It's something that I think is like WA specific, and we have a lot of really great photographers who really master that style. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how styles differ across cities and stuff like that.
So interesting. I think it's a big thing. Like, for me, being in Sydney, like, it's a big market, can often feel oversaturated, can often feel like hard to build community, but also that sort of price tag is higher because there is like more people getting married. The expectations, the types of people that are getting married are, often have higher budgets. So expectations are higher as well. And I was talking to the other week when I was speaking to like Josh Huggett in Adelaide, talking to him about that being a smaller market, even smaller than where you are in sort of Perth, that the complete differences in how he markets his work, but also what he can charge and but the community that he's been able to build there, because it is such a smaller group, and he sort of knows every other photographer in the town.
Big competition in West Australia as well, I have to say. Definitely don't have it, especially in the corporate space. We don't have as large companies as you have in Sydney. I've had some photographers reach out from Sydney with events their companies are hosting in Perth to get it covered. And their expectations are enormous, things like, using artificial intelligence to link up faces as you take photos and have them instantly uploaded, things I've never heard of doing, in the West Oz, but in Sydney, seems like this is a kind of trend, and, especially in that corporate kind of area.
Like that type of stuff, I think, is slowly creeping into like wedding photography, especially where people are expecting more instant turnaround on photos or to have them on slideshows at the reception even. I'm like, that just goes above and beyond what I would expect your job is as a wedding photographer.
Because that's a really interesting one, because, photographers nowadays, we're expected to turn around photos really quickly. I have a couple of jobs coming up, and the expectation is next day image delivery, straight, or, same day highlights as well. And, it is a very fast paced and intense field. I don't think many educational routes can prepare you for that. That's something that I never really got prepared for, because I went through university and all that. And the fast and intensity nature of photography, especially in, the 2020s, 2024, it's just not really taught. And that's something that I had to adapt to is, how do I work efficiently and fast and, still maintain all of my meetings and my calendars and stay sane at the same time, because it's really difficult to do, and I don't think much can prepare you for that, really.
I think you can only learn so much in school, right? Like you need to have real world experience. You can't be taught everything. And the industry is changing so fast that to be able to keep up, like the expectation of what it was last year to even coming into this year, it's like now people are expecting like AI to be used in editing. They're expecting you to turn around photos even faster because they now know that that's a sort of technology that we have our hands on. So they're having those expectations where back in the day, it wouldn't have been changing as quick. And what other people have done before is what you still do now. But having that change, it's like, yeah, just learning and going along and being comfortable with what it is that you do and not going, above and beyond.
Yeah, the transparent communication between client and photographer is really important. I always ask now, when do you need the photos by? If you do need them next day, we can probably get them done, but I just need verbal confirmation.
Is that something that you go about in sort of the event space more so, that they're expecting faster turnarounds?
Absolutely. So events are extremely fast-paced. Weddings are a little bit more intense on the day, but your post-production, you can kind of linger a little bit more. A lot of the time, if I'm honest, your gear carries you a lot of the time. You need to have high-end gear to produce really high-quality photos. But in terms of being an artistic photographer, there is a bit of a lower plateau compared to weddings. And that's just because there isn't as much need for posing or need for kind of creative angles or use of good natural light and all that kind of stuff that comes along with being a really good wedding photographer.
I'm glad you brought that up because I feel like gear is such a divisive topic for a lot of people. Like no one wants to talk about it. But for me, I'm like, good gear makes good photos. It will only take you so far. That is so true. It'll only get you to a certain point, but it'll advance you a lot further than a lot of other people that are struggling with bad gear. How did you sort of learn about what gear you needed to go into event spaces?
I think the biggest leap for me was video. I think I didn't. So I actually started in video in high school. So I was really lucky. My school had a media class. We started at about year 10 and went into year 12. And so I had a background in video. I got a real appreciation for art house cinema, filming things, editing, and I think we used Final Cut back then. And it was just it was a really good foundation to have. But when I got into the industry, when I got my first camera, I would have been about 18 years old. I instantly knew it wasn't what I needed to do video. I just didn't have the capabilities. I didn't have the lenses. So that's when I got into event photography. I started shooting things like birthdays. And that was my first kind of venture into it. Was a lot of birthday party photography as an 18-year-old, going to 18s and bringing the camera along, getting paid like $50 for the night. I actually shot some parties. I I would just say it was hood parties, like literally hood parties. I remember one in specific where I went to this house and they were like, "Oh, we'll pay you." You know, I think I charged them like $100 for the night or something like that. You know, I had a Canon 70D with an 18 to 55 lens, and it was I'll pay you $50 up front and $50 at the end. Little did I know the reason he wanted to do that was because he predicted this party was going to be shut down because it wasn't their house. They had literally, it was just a vacant house, and, you know, they scoped it out over a period of time, got their DJ, their lighting in there the day before, got like security on the door, brought people in, and they just hosted a big rave in the back of someone's house. Got me in as a photographer, and then halfway through, police show up and shut it down, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? You know, so yeah, it's funny to look back, you know, as an 18-year-old, I'm 28 now, and, you know, now I'm shooting, you know, huge events. It's really cool to see that progression along the timeline, but it's not something that happens overnight, right? It takes years and years and years of, you know, even perfecting your style as a photographer. You just need to continue to kind of practice and move on, and there's no real major leap. I think it's just something that's a kind of general progression over time. So I was studying architecture at the time, and then from a lot of those, you know, I did realize I really liked photography, but then it was a matter of how do you hone your skills more, and that's when I re-enrolled into photography school and spent 3 years there, something around there. Really trying to be an artist at that time. I was trying to produce, I guess, culturally significant work. So I wasn't really pursuing the money side of things. I did have the business on the side that I was still growing, but my passion was always about street photography or portrait photography, but in a culturally critical way, you know, that kind of artistic kind of approach to it. Yeah.
That's really cool. You went to school for photography. What was the sort of piece in that puzzle that said to you, I have to go to school to do photography?
I guess the calling wasn't really there. It was just it was really filling time, if I'm honest. It was, you know, I was at uni, and we always get told as, you know, in high school, you got to go to uni. So that's why I enrolled in photography. You don't need a photography degree to be a photographer, and I think a lot of people will tell you that. There are, I think the problem with a photography school, especially within a university, is the bureaucracy of it. So, you know, the higher ups always have a kind of authority over what content's being taught, but the industry is so fast paced and always changing. You know, in the last 3 years, we've had artificial intelligence come in, and that's completely changed how I work and everyone else works. But the universities aren't going to implement those teachings for another 4 or 5 years. But by then, the next technology is going to come along and revolutionize the industry again. So it's always a bit lagging behind. And I think that's why educational institutions really struggle with keeping up to date with the modern industry.
You know, obviously they can't be up to speed, but did you learn a lot going through that process, or?
I learned certain time management skills. I learned how to use cameras. I learned studio equipment. Absolutely. You know, Photoshop was a big component of the university course. So yes, I learned a lot of skills. I didn't really learn event or wedding photography skills, which is kind of what I built my business in. That's an entirely different skill set. What I did learn was, I guess, how to use a camera, how to be artistic in your approach. And those are things I guess a few years back I was looking at and I go, I didn't really learn a whole lot, did I? But now that I'm kind of more experienced, I'm valuing what I did learn a little bit more, because there are certain aspects within being a kind of creative that's really valued in weddings, for instance. I think creativity is highly valued in that industry, and having that background in, you know, artistic kind of photography, it's kind of got me a little bit more appropriate to the industry compared to, you know, kind of events, which is very stale and very basic. Yeah.
There will always be those things in every industry, in any artistic endeavor, where you have to sort of walk the path that's already there for you. You have to do what everyone else does to a certain degree. There are certain rules you've got to play with, and I'm sure that you learned a lot of that as you were on the job about what event photography is, what wedding photography is, and what types of things that you must do on the day. Sort of these, I have to tick these boxes. But as you said, there's a big element of it as well, which is very artistic. And you can't sort of learn those things on the job. You have to have practiced those before. Like, you can't read them from a textbook. Those are just practical skills that you pick up by going out, doing those types of things.
Absolutely. I think for those who want to become, really high-end like wedding photographer, I think what differentiates the middle of the market to the high-end market is that stylistic difference and that ability to have a very distinct look. And that's something that I'm trying to hone now for the last year, mostly through organising wedding editorials and really showcasing my unique kind of look and my unique way of or approach to photography. And I think that's definitely done a lot in terms of showing to my clients, hey, this is what I can produce, and this is how I differ to other people, and people will be attracted to that, and they will hire you for your look.
I think it's super important to be clear to clients what it is that you offer, right? So if a client has no idea who you are and they land on your page through Instagram, website, they hear about an ad that you have out there, if they go to one of your pages that you've curated and they can't immediately tell what it is that you offer, it's going to be very hard for them to keep going down that sort of channel of actually inquiring and then maybe like booking with you. For me, it's all about making it as easy as possible for them to come in and say, I know exactly what this person does, that they are who I want for the job that I need, right? So if for example, on my website, I was advertising multiple different styles of photography. I was saying I do events, I do weddings, I do families, I do headshots, whatever. Someone comes to me and says, I don't really know what this person does, what they specialize in. Now, whilst yes, it's helpful to have all of those and helpful to know how to do all of those. I think every style of photography relates to one another, and us as photographers and as creative people, we know this. We know that having these skill sets helps, really. Like you being a great event photographer helps you to be a good wedding photographer, I'm sure, because you've part of a wedding day is an event, really. So you've planned and you've done all that type of work. But to the client, they don't know that. They want to know, is this person specialized in the thing that I specifically need, because I'm spending a lot of money. So I can go to them or go to the person next door, which looks like for them, they do it week in, week out. So that if something goes wrong, they know how to change it because they've done it so many times before. Whereas this person kind of does a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'm not sure. I don't want to leave any doubt in someone's mind about that. But again, also to that point, I think for me, my brand is very much based around me as a person. So as much as I'm advertising myself as a wedding photographer, I make it very clear that I am a photographer. But how I differentiate myself from other wedding photographers is my personality, is my style. So I want to make it clear that this is what I do, but I'm not the same as the person down the road, because I'm very much have a different personality, and I may not be for you as well. I'm happy to turn clients away at the same time. I'm happy to say this is who I am, because I know that when I get those people come through the door, when they see my work, they're not going to even question, is there someone else? Because they know I'm exactly for them. I'm the right personality for them. They've seen enough of my stuff immediately that they're going to then book, because I've differentiated myself in other ways rather than just saying I do all of these types of photography.
Well said, Mike. Yeah, I agree. What I've found really interesting is exactly what you said. When clients visit your website and you look at their kind of journey, they're usually they're on your website. They're usually on one or two pages and then they leave. So you do need to have a very clear message in terms of what you provide and how you provide it. I guess my question at the moment for myself and for my business is what kind of ties together? Because I want to shoot year round. That's kind of my goal. I want to shoot from the start of the year to the end of the year, through winter as well. And the thing I've noticed is a lot of my weddings fall into that wedding season, and then my corporate events fall into that winter season. So I get work year round at the moment, and I'm really liking that. And it's how do I communicate this business that I'm building and have it kind of streamlined? I think one way to do it and one way to make it really work is there's a bit of a kind of conception in weddings amongst our clients that wedding photographers are the best kind of photographers. So I think if you base your business in weddings, you can very easily sell other elements in photography as well. And that's kind of something that I've just like picked up, because people are like, oh, you shoot weddings, you must be incredible at what you do. And there's that kind of expectation amongst clients. And I feel like a lot of wedding photographers do have the route into other kind of industries just because they are so proficient in weddings.
One of the things that I touch on all the time is people don't know what they can't see. Like, people don't know what they want, right? So if you don't have work in your portfolio, how can people know that they can ask you about that work, right? So if I never had weddings in my portfolio, no one would have ever booked me to do their wedding, because they wouldn't think I was a wedding photographer, because people want to see something first. It's the same with very particular styles of wedding photography. If you've never done an international sort of wedding before, people don't think you're an international photographer, so they don't sort of book you for those weddings. So you've got to advertise it. And how do you get that? Well, sometimes it's either working for free to be able to do it, or, as you said, do an editorial shoot where maybe there's a few people collaborating to get a shoot, or maybe you're sort of paying to go along to a shoot that someone else is hosting. Has that been really beneficial for you and your portfolio?
Absolutely. So about a year ago, I wasn't really where I wanted to be at with weddings. I was booking a lot of small jobs, and that was because I had structured my business in events. So, I was shooting a lot of events. I was studying at the same time. So I did a backup degree after I did my photography. That was around when COVID happened, so 2019. And then I did a social work degree as well in that time. I actually practiced as a therapist for a year and a half after that, while doing the business on the side. And that's why events worked great, was because I could shoot them and turn them around very quickly. I didn't need to do pre-meetings or any of that stuff, and I could have my 9 to 5 or study at the same time. So I didn't have a strong wedding portfolio. I shot weddings, but they were very small weddings usually, and people didn't really understand my skill set. They didn't really understand that I had been shooting since 15 years old, and I actually was quite proficient in a lot of different areas. So my take on it was just going to organise some wedding editorials. I think I've organised 2, and I've produced work from them, and now people have seen it. They've started to go, right, this guy can shoot weddings. This is the work he does, and I've turned my bookings around really. So now I'm booking a lot of photo and video packages. Huge 8-hour, 10-hour days, and I think I've booked like 10 for next year already, which I'm really happy with. So my calendar's filling with these really big jobs, compared to shooting a lot of smaller kind of stuff. So editorials and being able to showcase what you do. I did a free video for a wedding, and then that got me my first pay job earlier this year. And then from that pay job, it was a really big wedding in the Margaret River region in Perth. And I was able to showcase that to people, and people were like, yep, and started booking in from there. So absolutely, you really need to show people what you can do, and you don't just want to assume that people know your skill set, because you might have been shooting for 10 years and you might be very good, but if you can't show people, especially within the specific industry you're targeting, people won't book you. And that's something I learned the hard way. And it's kind of turned around now. But back last year, it was definitely a big thing. I was like, people aren't booking me. But it was because I didn't really have that portfolio, that really strong portfolio.
That's really interesting that you brought that up. And I'm glad you did, because I think for a lot of people, especially established photographers like yourself, had been working for a long time and had been hitting a bit of a hole because no one knows what it is that you do. If you're not showcasing your work, people don't know. But also, I think people get turned off doing styled shoots, editorial shoots, organising planned sort of, for anyone that doesn't know, for anyone that's not in the space, an editorial shoot would be sort of planning a editorial sort of session around looking like a wedding, for example, to get those photos in your portfolio. So it's not an actual like wedding happening, but you're styling it the way that you want it. So it's not, again, I think people are opposed to them because it's not the conditions that you would see on a normal like wedding day. But to get that work in your portfolio, I think is priceless for a photographer that may be stuck in a particular area that mightn't be able to press on to that next sort of price point to be able to elevate their work in a different way. How do you get that work in your how do you get clients like that? Well, you need that work. So you have to find a way to make it work.
There's so many different aspects you need to bring together. You really need to think of yourself especially as a photographer. There's so much that falls on us in terms of directing and organizing things, you need to think of yourself as a kind of creative director. How are you going to direct this shoot? You need to be the one stylizing it, bringing it together, liaising, contacting people. And if you put in the work, you definitely get a lot of rewards from it.
Like early on in my career, I did a lot of like morning sort of ceremonies. So we would go out and do the like portraits during the midday.
Yep.
Now, anyone that's not a photographer, that's not a good time to go and take photos during the middle of the day. It's very bad sort of lighting. We were standing out in the open too, like in a couple of instances there wasn't a lot of trees around. We couldn't sort of hide. So those sort of weddings I did haven't ever hit my portfolio. They are not on my website. They're nowhere. No one will ever see those, right?
Yep.
I did the work. I loved it. I love being there, but that's not the work that I want to advertise because it's not my best work. And a lot of clients are saying like, I hear a lot of photographers saying, that clients don't trust me. They don't trust what it is that I bring. Well, you have to have that style built up over time. And like you said, when you get a style, when you have a lot of work in your portfolio that clients actually book you for, you can then say, well, how I did this went out between 5 and 6. Or between 6 and 7, whatever the golden hour is, or I went to this exact place, or we took these photos in this way. This is how I achieve results. So I think that is, important to get that there because that does start the conversation, but also puts a lot of trust back on you as the photographer.
Yeah, you're respected more, you're appreciated more. And when you're in that position as a professional and they kind of view you as an expert, you have so much more leverage in your negotiation and what you're able to put forward as your packages. And So yeah, well said. Yeah.
I think you also get to do the work that you enjoy. It's not only that you have to go out and organize a style shoot. I think that there's a lot to be said for Instagram, for posting things on social media, like sharing creative work that you do outside of weddings, particularly outside of what you do, like just doing work and practicing on your own at your house, at your studio, out on a like Tuesday morning, you go out to take photos, share that work and share what it is you're doing because so often your clients are there to view that stuff. Your clients are sort of watching along and then they'll reach out and say, oh, I saw those photos you did. They were lovely. How did you manage to do those? How can we get that in our portfolio? How can I get an image like that? I want it, but they wouldn't have reached out to us for that had they not seen it. At the end of the day, it all just comes down like marketing, right? Like marketing is everything. And that's all that social media is. So I'm no better photographer than anyone else. I've just worked out a way to get my work in front of more people. So that's all that it comes down to. Like there's no difference between me, the photographer now, between me last year when I didn't have any sort of followers on Instagram. But people are now more likely to see my work, then more likely to trust me because of the work that I do.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. We were touching on this before we started recording, didn't we? And how just the number and I will get into it a little bit, but it's a very strange world, right? Where the number does matter, and there's a kind of I don't know how you would say it. It's almost like a social kind of reinforcement amongst people when you have a high number of followers, and then other people look at that and they go, oh, that guy must be really good because he has a high, and then it kind of snowballs from there because people perceive you differently, and it's a very strange concept. And I've noticed this myself because I went from about 1 to 7 in the last 3 or 4 months, about 4 months, and the way people interact with me and what they say, it's changed, and it's entirely based on how many followers you have, and if you can kind of build that number up, you can definitely position yourself based on that kind of social appraisal a lot differently to if you didn't have that kind of social media following. It's a really kind of interesting idea.
Is that something that you were like trying to do when you first started uploading content, was to build that sort of social proof?
Not really. It was more about, yes, in a way. I guess for me, what I was trying to do was I was trying to find a way to put my personality out there. And in business, if you can keep the attention on you and you can make sure people remember your face, you will get hired more. And that's just the way it is. So it wasn't really about the social appraisal was something I realized later on when people started to interact with me differently. But to start off, it was more, how do I get remembered more? How do I make sure people, when they go, oh, I need a photographer, they go, oh, James is the guy. And that was just get your face out there, make sure people always see your name, people remember you, you have something unique about you that people kind of instantly think to hire you for certain jobs.
Is there a process that you have for like evaluating artistic work, or whether it be, Instagram content, whether it be other types of marketing? Is there an approach that you have?
A lot of my approaches are very informal, Mike. I'm a pretty informal guy. I always, wear like, Balinese style kind of dress shirt. So a bit of professionalism, but very casual.
I like the informal approach. I think that's totally fine.
Thank you.
I think a lot of people relate to that as well, because there's a lot of like processes thrown around that are like, you must do X, Y, and Z, and that may not necessarily work for someone. But it's more just about like, what's your sort of mindset? What are you going in with, hoping to achieve, and what are your sort of markers that you're like, how do you know when you need to change something or improve?
I guess for me, it's an ongoing process. It never really ends. I'm always trying to improve upon something, and I'm always trying to learn. I try and have as open mind as I possibly can. I'm never, feedback, I think of it more as feed forward. If someone says something to me, I'm not going to get offended. I want to kind of take that in as openly as I can and work out how I can implement it. And I try and do that in every aspect. And I don't think you need a process. I think you just need to be open-minded. I think you need to be aware that your approach probably isn't the best, and it is always a way you can improve, and to not have that pretentious attitude that I am the best and I can possibly not change, because that's not true. And it will never be true, because even when you do evolve, there are probably things from your old self that you've forgotten that are probably going to be useful in your new self. It's just an ongoing process.
Absolutely. I think that's so important to keep that open mindset about how it is you can grow, because you can always learn something from someone. I have people ask me questions and I'm able to learn things because I'm like, how do I answer that question? So I'm like learning how to answer it. Even though they're asking me for advice, they're helping me because I'm learning how to answer that question back to them. So you can constantly be learning and making sure that you're never closed off in your creativity, but in your sort of business either. So important, because we can learn so much from different people. As a creative, I did want to ask, what are the types of things that you're doing to practice your creativity? Is it something that you're constantly working on, to going back and practicing, researching how to be better for next time?
I'm always researching. Give you an example. I've never photographed fireworks before, and I was at the Royal Show the other day, and I literally just Googled how to photograph fireworks 2 minutes before they came up. So that's one example. And then took the photos, and I also learned when you're shooting a really dusty, oily show, clean your lenses, because there was a big lens smudge, and the first time ever I experienced lens flare. So I wasn't happy with those photos, but it's just
artsy.
Yeah, there you go. It was a learning. That was a learning experience in itself. I think as a photographer, you really need to you need to have that creativity. As a creative person, you can't get stale on what you're producing. If that makes sense. So I'm always trying to find different ways to do things. And yes, I go on YouTube the night before my editorials, or maybe the week before my editorials, and I look at ways I can do things, and then I would implement that into my work. So I'm always kind of progressing in the way I want it to progress.
I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of like just learning new things, even if they're not going to be easily implemented in the work that I do. Like you taking photos of fireworks is very interesting, because one day you may have a wedding where they have fireworks at the wedding, and now you know how to do it. It's those little things. It's like practicing small little details, especially with photography, but any type of creativity. When you're doing a task that you may not think relates, it's funny how quickly it comes back. I'm learning a lot of like video at the moment, trying to up my sort of video. I don't know anything about it. Like I've only been a photographer. Learning about video is a whole world to me that I don't understand.
It's a beautiful world, though. Once you get into it, it's amazing.
It's lovely to be able to produce good quality videos, but to get to that point, I'm like unlearning everything that I learned as a photographer to then kind of bring it in, like so many things and so many different rules that I'm trying to push. But at the moment, it's not applying to anything because I don't work as for anyone as a sort of videographer. I create content online. So everything is just trial and error. I'm throwing things at the wall and I learn a new skill that I may implement further down the line. I think that as a creative person, that's important to keep going on that. We talked about earlier specializing. That's important in your business, but you don't have to do it in your everyday life. You can still be creative, and do the things you love.
Absolutely. I learned video in a very similar way, Mike. I guess not learned, but learned it to a professional level, because there's a big difference between learning video and then learning it to a professional level, because
absolutely.
You realize
I'm not a professional.
When you start to get into the professional aspects of it, there's so many rules you have to understand, and even the color grading process, for instance, and your log profiles and being able to convert log profiles accurately. It's it can be a bit daunting. I learned it when I went on holiday last year. I did a big trip after I went to Europe for 3 months, and it was my kind of getaway before I was like, let's just really settle down into the business, because by that point I was making a full-time salary from it, so I was like, let's do this, come back and then focus on it and really make this my life. And on that trip I did exclusively video, and I practiced things like editing log profiles, understanding what they were, what shutter speed should you be at for video, what settings, the importance of white balance, because you're not shooting raw, you have to be more technically sound in the way you approach it. And these are all things I learned on my big trip of my life. And then, I did all my editing. I learned DaVinci Resolve while I was there, and then I came back, and 4 months later I got my first paid wedding videography job. And I didn't have that kind of idea, I was going to implement it fully into my business and have videography as a high-end kind of aspect of it, but now it is. And it's just because I did it for fun. And I think that's the beauty of our industry, is you are always learning and you are always working, but the work and the learning part of it is so fun and enjoyable because we all love it. It doesn't feel like it. And, it's something that you do have to do it. And I think if you don't enjoy doing it, it might not be the industry for you, as much as that may be hard to hear, because the people who do love it, like myself and like you, Mike, we're going to put the effort in and we're going to learn the new skills and the new industries that are kind of combining, like photography and videography. They're kind of merging into a joint thing now. We're going to put the time and the effort into learning how to do that because we love to do it. And you need to kind of have that mindset if you want to remain competitive in the media kind of realm.
Absolutely, learning new things is so interesting, and if you don't enjoy it, you're never going to be able to compete with someone that does. Like, they're always going to outwork you, unfortunately. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because you can take those skills and move it in a different direction. I know so many people that started in one creative field and moved into another, but have applied a lot of stuff. Like me hosting this podcast, I would have never hosted this a couple of years ago, but I have all the stuff to do it. I've learned a lot of skills along the way that have brought me to this point. So don't ever be scared to try other things, and that's okay. I think that's just as much of a learning as you going in and doing that sort of birthday party and realizing you didn't enjoy it. You've transitioned out of that. I don't know anyone who would stay in just doing birthday parties, but you've transitioned out of that, you know what I mean? And you've grown a lot through that.
That's a really interesting point, Mike, and it's just kind of spiraled me down because I worked in an organization called Anglicare. My role was to do psychoeducation and risk assessment for people who had recently been separated. And it was a completely different area. You're talking about the social sciences and psychology, but so many skills from that experience and that year and a half of working there, it transitioned into my photography business and my capabilities as an artist. And I was speaking to another artist or photographer last week who was a paramedic, and his skills as a paramedic even transferred into the realm of arts and photography. So yes, everything that you experience in life, it's going to somehow tie into the next venture you have.
I think the best artists are people that have had experience, that have had sort of life experience in something else. For you, I'm sure working in that industry would have been, very eye-opening, and being able to have those conversations and learning how to talk to people and a lot of different things that you can bring in now, but you've had that lived experience that now you know so much more when it comes to being a videographer, how to tell a story, how to communicate with clients. There'd be so many different things that would come across.
It more so gave me an appreciation for what I do and for what I am able to do, and how lucky I was to start something so early on, like photography, because photography is a really hard skill to master. And I don't think by any means I've mastered it, but I think in order to get proficient at it, because when did you start photography, Mike?
I started in 2018. So not in this grand scheme of things, not that long.
Yeah. Well, that's still 7 years, mate. That's 6 years. That's a long time.
But I hadn't sort of picked up a camera at school. Like, I know a lot of people that had way more years of experience than I was. I was like yourself. I went to university, sort of transitioned out of a degree that I didn't really like into photography because I really enjoyed it. I'd started it when I was at uni, transitioned into it. Studied physics and maths.
Okay. Yeah.
So
I can see that.
Transitioning out of that, total other end of the spectrum, I was like, no, this is just not for me. And I hear that so much from people who, I think everyone's an artist, right? But not everyone knows how to be an artist. And so many people who've gone through other careers and done other things and then finally realize that this is what they want to do. And that change happens, and they then go on to be really successful at it because that experience, and they know what it is, and they're so grateful, like you said, to be able to do what they do.
Absolutely. How did you find the leap from, I guess, amateur to professional? Because that would have been a real hard leap, because I'm sure you agree, it's actually a really hard skill to get to that point where people do pay for it. You really need to be very kind of technically sound, right? And
I think for me, it was just kind of throwing myself in a little bit. I did a lot of work for free when I started, threw myself into any job that I could possibly do just to get experience. But then, as I said, advertising and being very, very mindful of what it was I was offering and how I was presenting myself. So that kind of helped me sort of fast track it a little bit because people knew exactly what I offered. In the beginning, I did sort of family photography. I did a bit of product photography. I worked for small businesses as well and kind of advertised all that work on my website. Kind of confused a lot of people, right? So then it was like, I'll take that down. I'll still do the work because I really love it and it helps experience-wise, but I'll just do some like weddings for free, advertise that work, use that work as portfolio. And then slowly it snowballs when people realize that, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. As you said before, if you don't have that portfolio, you can be the most experienced photographer in the world, but if you don't have a portfolio, no one will believe that you know what you're doing. So
absolutely.
Just building that slowly, and then gaining those referrals from past clients really helped.
What was the most difficult thing in terms of your creative approach that you found was hard to grasp, I guess? What did you find as the most difficult thing in photography?
One of those things that I really struggle with is being a creative person. I don't think I'm purely creative, and I could maybe argue that no one really is. I feel like every idea that I've ever had has come from somewhere else, and I've made a few videos about this online about my style, that I think it comes from a lot of different places, and I'm definitely inspired from a lot of the different things that I've done before. But even like going into like a wedding, inspired by the way that other people have done work before, worked at venues before, and done particular styles of photos or done particular type of posing. So for me, that was the hard thing. It was like, I'm not someone that can just come up with an idea out of nowhere. I need to have already seen it. So I did a lot of research, right? And a lot of planning, a lot of just like viewing other people's photos online and like kind of analyzing them. What's the good, like, what are they technically doing correct here? And I still struggle with that to this day of like how to be technically correct, but still be creative with it. Because I'm starting to, as I mature as a photographer, I'm starting to understand those creative elements more, but understanding that those creative things come from breaking rules, from breaking things that I've learnt before on how to be technically correct. And how do you balance that? Especially when there's clients involved, who expect something from you. At the end of the day, they expect a certain style that I've kind of built up. So how do you get creative with it? That's one of the things that I still struggle with, and I wish I had the answer. I think it's kind of like just a balance of, well, I'll make sure that I've got everything correct, because then I'm not stressing out in my own head that I'm not going to produce work for the client. So I've got that sort of box ticked. Now let's go and do a little bit of creative work and kind of break that rule and see what it ends up being. If the images don't turn out the way that I had in my head, that's totally fine, because I've already got the other work here. But let's just try it, because that'll add something. I'll either learn that that's not the way to do things, or it'll be really good, and then I'll continue to implement it moving forward.
Yeah, good one. Yep. I think your approach is really good, Mike, because you absolutely, like you said, you want to have that. You need to have your bases covered, but you also want to have your wings spread a little bit, and you want to explore, while on the job. Absolutely. But it's a good way to do it. I do the same way. You kind of capture what you want, and then if you have the time, you might explore a little bit.
And you don't always have the time, and that's okay. Understanding that you still work for the client at the end of the day. Like if you wanted to do purely creative work, you just go work for yourself, and you'd go be a pure artist, right? So there's always pros and cons. Understanding who you work for, but you do get to, as you said, be a bit creative with it. And it's a very fortunate space that we're in, that we are able to be more creative than you could be in, say, like the event space.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. There is absolutely a creative blockage in that area, and I'll be the first one to say it. It can be a bit dry. It can be a bit dry, but like you said, it's you work for the client, so you need to produce what they want, and they always want a kind of certain look in that space, and it's usually that looks usually very consistent across photographers, and that it makes it a hard kind of area to really progress past a certain paywall. I found that paywall is usually quite low, because you don't have the potential to differentiate yourself in the terms of a style, a photography style that's very artistic and unique. Yeah,
absolutely. I feel like that would be very hard. Is that something that you're going to continue down that route? Are you going to continue in the event space?
I think so. I think it comes back to that question of what are the capabilities of business structure in media? Because while I want to have my personality involved in it, like the owner of Spudshed, Tony Gallardi, his personality marketed the business, but he had a business behind him that wasn't even associated with him. So it's that's kind of where I'm at. It's what kind of niches can tie together that we can still convey a message and not be confusing. I think there's certain elements in photography, like people. If you can kind of, your specialization might be people, but then people kind of have a different areas you might photograph people. For instance, you might do corporate events and headshots, and they're two kind of closely tied together, and it might not be too confusing for the viewer if they see that. But if you start putting together things like architectural, food, commercial, that's when it starts to get confusing. So I'm trying to work out at the moment, how do I specialize, but how do I still target a few key industries so I can make sure it's a sustainable business. And what I mean by that is something that gets work year round, that will be capable of having staff members, and you can have a team behind you and you can sustain that. So that's kind of what I'm interested in. I really want to think of it as a business, but a very high-end business. And how do we maintain that quality to that high luxury market while still being able to provide multiple services? I don't really want to let up corporate, because I'm getting really big clients. Like I've booked Westpac, which is biggest bank in Australia, or West Australia, Office Works. I've worked for the WWE, the UFC, and these are really big names. And people seeing that you work with them, it gives you another level of kind of social appraisal, because they go, this guy works with these really big organizations, they're international companies. He must be really good as well. And that does help booking clients in other industries like weddings. So I think it is useful to be able to have that foundation, but it just comes down to a matter of how do you market it then, because you really need to have a clear message in this day and age. People spend like 5 seconds on your website, so you really need to be able to kind of instantly communicate it and secure it that way.
It really sounds like you're going down the route of sort of setting up a like in-house studio type situation where there's a few different things under the umbrella. And I think that's one of the only ways that I've seen that successfully done. I think as an individual sort of business, as a sort of sole trader, it's going to be hard, especially if you want a big staff on for starters. But as a sole business that's just around your name, I think it's hard to branch out and do other things. But I've seen a lot of studios do it really well, where there is a lot of crossover between the clients that you're working with in those spaces.
Yeah. And that's something that I am a little bit regretful of, is I've used my business name for my business. I don't know how harmful that's going to be in the long term. It might be really harmful because, like you say, you need to become a kind of collective group. But I don't know, business is an interesting thing where eventually, what I found now is my name's just a brand, really. It's just kind of become, people, and people know because I do have photographers who I send to jobs, and people know you're hiring James Stefano. You're not necessarily hiring James Stefano. You're hiring a brand, you're hiring a philosophy, and you're hiring a way of how we do work. And it's very easy to venture into a space where you're not really maintaining that kind of quality or that style. And I think that's something that I'm also playing around with is how do I bring photographers in and make sure they share the same values and they share the same philosophy and they share the same stylistic capabilities and shooting the same way that I do, so we can have a kind of a cohesive approach to our work.
Unfortunately, that is where we're going to have to leave today's episode. The last little bit of James's episode recording didn't sync and didn't back up, and we haven't been able to get it back. We were rounding down the episode anyway, so I think that's okay, and I hope that you were able to pull a lot from this conversation anyway. If you did enjoy what James was having to say, definitely go and check him out on Instagram. It's at James DiStefano Photo on Instagram. I'll leave the links down below in the show notes as well. Or also, if you're interested in any of his work, go to his website as well. It's jamesdis.com. So you'll be able to find all of his portfolio work there as well, and his corporate stuff and his wedding photography as well, and follow that journey along as he hopes to expand his business. And I hope that you guys are able to get a lot of inspiration from this conversation that we had today.
Well, that is the end of today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation half as much as I enjoyed having it. If you did enjoy today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you did leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or a 5-star rating on Spotify. Or if you're watching over on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and leave us a comment down below to let us know that you did enjoy this episode. Also, feel free to share this episode on Instagram and tag me at Mike Jeffrey Photography so I can reshare them on my stories. And also message me and let me know who you would love to hear on an upcoming episode of this podcast. You know, I've always tried my best to be able to have conversations with people who are in the creative space and people that I think would be a good fit on this podcast. And I would love your input as well. In a very privileged position at the moment where, I'm able to reach out to people and have them on my podcast and have really interesting conversations with a whole range of people in the creative space and talk about their creative journey. So if there is anyone you would love to hear from, please let me know and I will do my best to try to get them on the podcast. At this time, I would also like to acknowledge the first creatives of the land on which I am recording today, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of so-called Australia. As we tell stories of today, I just want to reflect on how First Nations people here and across the globe have guided and informed our understanding of the creative journey. But until next week, friends, have a lovely week and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye. Editing and post-production on this episode was done by Mossy Media, and music was created by JWPATON.